hopefully, and good conversation about community. The only thing I asked the panelists here today, who I'm going to introduce just briefly, and they could say a few words themselves, is that what is community? So I'm going to start with Karen Diemer, who's the city manager for the city of Arcata here. She's got a couple of announcements to make today, too, about community. We have Chief Andy Mills, who joined us also in Eureka at parades earlier this year, which almost were historical in terms of numbers. The MLK parade, his words about community for me really hit me, and I took them really well in terms of how we need to treat each other better. So we'll say a few words about that. Estelle Fennell, one of the founding members of KMI?
No, not founding, but
okay.
Pretty close.
Okay. I call her Ms. Soham, and one of our board of supervisors that's doing a fine job here in the county. Dani Burkhart, I've known for a number of years now, when she was just starting to be the executive director of California Cannabis Voice of Humboldt. She's helping a lot of the farmers get their applications in and their permits. So I'm going to throw it back to everyone. You can say a few words. Karen, why don't you start? What is community?
When you ask me that question, I think the definition of community probably changes monthly for me. But you know, this last year I've just really focused, at least in Arcata, on all of the small little individual actions that people do that bring us together, people to people. And they're pretty simple for me, whether it's a conversation you strike up with somebody next to you in a bus, whether it's taking your neighbor's garbage can out because they're too elderly to do it at this point in their life, or if they become bigger things, whether it's putting on an event like Cannifest or an Easter egg hunt on Easter, or putting on meals at the holiday times for people that can't afford, you know, to produce a Thanksgiving meal for themselves. So, but there are all those series of small little actions that we do that don't distance ourselves from each other, but actually bring contact between people together in our community in a positive way.
Thank you.
I'll save my announcements for later.
Chief?
Well, community is an interesting word because for some of us, community is those we love, those that are around us. And for others, it's maybe a broader context of a wide variety of people. But I think in terms of what's going on here in Humboldt and in Eureka specifically, community is something that's in trouble and something that we can fix. There needs to be the community that is caring for one another that Karen talked about, but also a community that's civil. And I think that is the first stage of an effective community, and we can talk about why all those things have taken place, but the reality is, unless I can be civil to those around me, there really isn't community. And so it begins there.
Thank you.
I thought about it on the way up, and I would say that community is the foundation and the linchpin of society. It's basically how we came out of our little shells and started working together, whether it was for security, whether it was for feeding ourselves, whether it was for having fun. But generally speaking, community, to my mind, is and should be inclusive of everybody in a specific area. And I used to talk about this because Ken referenced me being involved with KMUD News. Well, KMUD, and I was the news director at KMUD and used to go and do conferences and whatever. And what you have a lot of times in community radio is also this concept of alternative. And in a lot of community radios, people would just serve the alternative community. But from my perspective, community was demographic. So there's the Eureka community, there's the Humboldt community, there's the Soham community, etc. And then there's the overall community of people. So for me, community is all about recognizing that we're all in it together and we give our various expertise and goals and passions for the greater good. And it's reflected by what Chief Mills just said. His take on community is we have a community that needs to be helped. That's his job. He's thinking through those minds, and that makes him an integral part of community. So we all are, and how do we work together?
Excellent, thank you. Dani?
I've learned through my years of work here at CCBH and with the Humboldt Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and the Women Cultivating Community Group that I came to a similar conclusion as Estelle and Chief Andy Mills, that community includes everybody in not only your geographic area, but in your demographic area. And it also includes people who don't necessarily consider themselves included. And that's an important thing to consider, because when you take into consideration the perspective of people who don't feel included in a community, but who are still very much a part of it, you start to take on a whole new meaning to community and what it means to build those bridges and continue building the community as a whole.
Excellent. My definition is very similar. I'm a futurist, so I love visions. Cannifest, in a way, is a vision. It started with Humboldt Green Week about 11 years ago, celebrating Earth Day and the environment and community. 420 as well. So 420 gets emphasized as the laws change and farmers come out of the hills and they join the rest of us in a very active community way. We have a family interactive zone. People think from cups and other things, other parts of the country, that's kind of odd. It's not odd to us. This is family. This is about all of us. And these two communities together, coming together into the light, those that were in the hills before, those that have filed their applications and signed affidavits with the county, which I can't imagine. Be a little scary if I was in those shoes. But to have that vision of, no, we are in all this together. I love the demographic. It's local. It's really about us. We at Community Pride and Peace, one of the organizations that Steve Geeter I helped found, we have always capitalized the U in Community Pride and Peace. And for a special reason. We think U is, we have to take care of ourselves. That's important. But we need to also take care of other. You reflected that, Karen, very well. I think there's simple things. It's not real complicated. Sometimes just a hello or can I help you in the street to somebody, finding them some services, some resources that might help them better their lives. I was going to go back to Chief Mills. When we talked with you a while back, you mentioned there's some research on kind of a philosophy of policing that's community-based. Could you say a few words about that? Do you remember?
Well, there's many types of policing, as one might imagine, and the most prevalent kind that you would see in the country is community policing. And but there's community policing in name only, and then there's community policing in action. And community policing can be real quickly broken into three areas: public relations, problem solving or problem-oriented policing, and then community policing as kind of the whole governing part of that. And what that means is you're breaking it down to its simplest element, where you're building community capacity, you're working with neighborhoods to solve crime problems and increase safety and the feeling of security. And as part of that, what we have chosen to do is really build that connection with different communities, especially communities who are maybe on the margins of society, and those who feel marginalized oftentimes by society. And that's by intent and purpose, but working those three together builds police legitimacy and transparency, and then that allows that capacity to grow.
I'm going to make an observation that I think most people in this room even would agree with, and hopefully you're thinking about your definition of community as we're having this conversation. There's an unfortunate word that I think is very real and palpable right now, which is fear. There's some elections that happen, there's a lot of change in the world. We pick up the newspaper every day or our phones and we just go, I don't know how much more I could take. This is just all kind of coming through a fire hose. But on the other hand, we started cleaning up Arcata Plaza, and just picking up trash. You relate to people. Sometimes they're in between things in life. Sometimes they're homeless. Sometimes they're kids that are, drawing with their parents in the middle of Arcata Plaza. There's all different kinds of things, and it just as one-on-one encounters, you start to realize we don't really have to be that fearful. But the fear from farmers in this transition period, I call it the messy middle, and trying to become legitimate, put a business license on the wall, and become a really more important center of what we're trying to do up here in our values that we espouse. Do you have any comments about fear and hope?
I can take that one. Fear, the only antidote to fear is hope. And to keep that alive, it takes the smallest actions in your community, whether it's you by yourself taking a garbage bag with you on a walk and picking up the refuse you see, or if it's you and a group of friends organizing something to help the homeless population, or contributing to any number of groups that are actively doing things in the community already. Those actions, as small as they can be, can have the largest effects on the whole community at large. They create a ripple effect of hope. They give other people the initiative to go and do more actions because you showed them the way. It's all about, initiating that spark.
Just one takeaway from that, Dani, it's like an example. If you present yourself and you carry yourself a certain way, that example gets translated and it kind of starts to draw people in to say, oh, that's what the value system we're supposed to be espousing.
So one of the things I wrote down here is ebb and flow. And, looking back at the last 40, 50 years, there were people who in the 60s, 70s did not like the way the urbanization of America was happening. They wanted to come back into rural areas. They wanted to settle down. They had a lot of hope and a lot of dreams for a simple lifestyle. And out of that developed this whole thing with people just growing a little plant for themselves. And then that slowly but surely grew into a huge industry where some people came in on a more commercial aspect and others just were kind of hanging out. And then, as it became clear that this was something that was taking root in Humboldt County, you had a pushback, which was the campaign against marijuana planting, which engendered a lot of fear of people running around, hiding under trees, helicopters overhead, didn't want to say what you did for a living, all of those things. So that's kind of endemic to that community. And then the conquering of fear was going forward with the dream that this was actually not a very bad substance, that it could be medicinal, and it should and could be legal. That happened, and now comes the next phase of implementing that legality, and that old fear is still there for some people. If I step out, is somebody going to cut me off? If I step out, am I going to lose everything that I had? But I would say that I really want to applaud everybody who has stepped out, because it's here, whether people like it or not, change has happened. And fear, change can engender fear too, in its own way. Change. I think about the people who were here, 75 years ago, let's say. They had no idea this was coming down the pike. We don't know what's coming down the pike 75 years from now, but let's make sure that what we're doing is actually sustainable and can help what's coming down in the future. It can actually be a foundation for a diversified economy, a healthy economy, a community that works together. So I'll stop talking, but those things really resonate for me, having covered this as a journalist and then gotten involved in county government. It's just been an amazing roller coaster ride, and to find ourselves here today you know, looking very seriously at the future, it's amazing. So thank you to everybody who stepped up. Please help others who are fearful to step out. It's so important.
Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, similarly, I think the people that we have coming into local government for permits, whether it's Arcata or Eureka or the county, are those that have hope. The ones that come to our counter have hope. So I think the piece is to make sure that those of you that are coming to our counters to keep engaged with us and telling us what isn't working. Because those that are still living in the industry in fear are not going to come forward unless we can be successful with those that are coming forward right now and show them that there is a pathway that will lead to success if you work hard.
Yeah, can I just jump on that a second? Because this is really a big issue as we get closer and closer to the middle of the year and then on into January of 2018. Is how do we prepare for what's going to happen in January of 2018? And I think that we all need, the cities and the county need to work with you and get your engagement at every step of the way. We really do want to help you. There is nothing to fear from the county or the city, or the state. And it is, some of it is very, very difficult, but we have to work together.
There's an exhibit over here in Franceschi Hall as you walk in. It's just in the corner to the right. It's called Weed the People. But it's a very dense exhibit. It's got really the history of Humboldt and the North Coast. I encourage you to go over there. One of the books there, if you call it a book, it's handmade here in Humboldt by Scott Holmquist in southern Humboldt. There are very few exist in the world. One is at the Smithsonian, one is at the U.S. Library of Congress, one is at the Getty, and one's at the Bancroft that I know of. And so you get to see this up front and close and personal, and it is personal. There's 3 deaths, a book about 3 young men that died as a result of this. And then one of the quotes from an activist, a woman in southern Humboldt that really has been here this whole time for that history. She said, "We're not criminals, we're outlaws." I kind of like that, I don't know why. But we've got this messy middle, this transition that we're in. We've got some new organizations, nonprofits we're starting. People are filing their applications. Do you have anything else that you want to report out and announce to the community to say, hey, let's show up for this, let's pay attention to that? Like, for example, in Eureka, where a couple of parades happened that they floored me. I mean, it was amazing to see the amount of people that come out to these things and really care. I mean, it was very emotional. So I'll open it up to the panel.
Well, I can bring up a couple of items. One is on the March scene. The next March, national and local, will be the March for Science. And so that'll be hosted in Arcata on the 22nd, next Saturday. And that'll be located at the D Street Neighborhood Center. The other piece, as we talk about fear and hope, is that we had the passage of Prop 64, and while that created a lot of hope in the industry, it also created a lot of fear in a lot of our local communities. And the state has not come out with what all of those regulations are going to look like on the non-medical side. So Arcata is going to start a series of meetings actually this week to have a community discussion about what should the non-medical side of cannabis look like in Arcata. I think that we've got pretty good regulations in for the industrial and manufacturing side of cannabis. That would be easy, I think, for Arcata to roll out non-medical manufacturing. But what we have really nothing in place for is the retail aspects, and I think that's the piece that has created some fear in communities all across California. Can cannabis be sold on every store around Arcata Plaza? Could every restaurant have one menu item in, say, the dessert section that has a little cannabis leaf next to it? I mean, all of those types of questions need to be vetted by the local community. And so to that end, we're going to start a series of meetings. The first one will be this Wednesday, April 19th, from 2 to 4 o'clock, specifically targeting those that are in the cannabis industry to come and start to tell us what are the creative and really innovative things that you're all thinking about as we roll out retail non-medical cannabis. It'll be followed by, we've got a series of business meetings that are set, and then a general public meeting that'll be on May 10th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And all of those events will be at the D Street Neighborhood Center in Arcata, really focused on non-medical and how do we roll that piece of the legislation out. And then the state will come and tell us how we're really supposed to do it. But it would be nice for local communities to have a chance to dream, what do we want it to look like in our community? And then we'll do our best to hold that vision as the state brings down regulation and educate the state of this is what we think is important to our community. We need to get out in front of that conversation, I think.
Just interject something real quick. I've been traveling around California and following all of this on the banking issues, on the new regulations that state's about ready to release. It's still piecing these things together. It's very much a moving puzzle. But it's interesting, even in LA and Sacramento and the Bay Area, I often wear the shirt. It's Humboldt, and it's got Humboldt on the back, and they go, "You're from Humboldt?" "Yeah." "What are you guys doing?" And they're very interested. It's very active conversation. And we even, in Sacramento, at some of the BMCR meetings, they were telling us, "We're sick and tired of you guys. You're so far ahead of everyone else, and you're thinking about how this should be treated and how you need to do this in terms of from the farm all the way down to the retail side." So I think we're doing something right as leaders, community leaders, in trying to create a new model in this really difficult time.
There's so much, could probably do a marathon on this, but Karen mentioned Prop 64, ALMA, and what that will mean. And right now, the governor has a trailer bill that would try to blend both the medical and the recreational together, which may sound easy, but may be a real problem for Humboldt County. Because in the medical cannabis, which the local communities had a lot of say in, we looked at minimizing vertical integration, which might be great if, say, you're going with the old model where you grew the plant, you trimmed it, and then you took it on down to the city or wherever you took it and sold it, as a medical entity, of course. But what happens if you have a vertical integration on a large scale is that a large entity can swallow the whole industry, and that leaves the small people out. So we're very, very concerned about that, and I'm a member of the California State Association of Counties Working Group on Cannabis. We're going to be talking about that. And I do want to say also the Board of Equalization is going to have a meeting here on May 8th at the Sequoia Center, and they're going to be talking about resources for cannabis businesses. So I hope you put that in your calendar. That's going to be really good. May 17th, CSAC is going to meet and talk about policies from all the counties across the state. At the end of June, CSAC is going to meet in Humboldt County, which is like, as you said, it's just amazing. And we're going to have meetings there, and you'll be hearing more about that. And then in July, we're going to have a meeting in Sacramento where we talk with the legislators about this. But this is not something we can just wait and let somebody else do. This has to happen now, and we have to stay involved because it's moving very, very quickly as everybody prepares themselves for January 2018. So I think it's really important for people to understand that procrastinating, it cannot be the rule of the day at this point. I know most of you are people who have stepped up. There are a lot of people who are procrastinating, and they're not doing themselves or their community any favors. The one thing I really want to slide back to is, all of this is very idealistic, but there was another side of this industry which really developed when it became an industry, and that is a lot of crime involved. Home invasions, killings. We just had a shooting on Darva Loop yesterday. Somebody who was involved in a marijuana grow was attacked by 3 people from out of state, or out of county anyway, and shot. He wasn't killed, but that's not acceptable. We really need to get to the point where this is just like whatever, wine or anything else, and that there isn't that criminal element involved. And it's up to you guys to make that happen, because right now, even as we're trying our hardest to bring people into compliance, there are a lot of people who are saying, oh, I'm going in and I'm getting a permit, and they're wreaking havoc. They're not. And they're taking advantage of the quote-unquote green rush. They don't care about our community, and they'll be gone when they've made those millions of bucks. And we really need to stand up for our community and make the stand that Humboldt, stands for a good, healthy lifestyle and all of those things that we treasure so much in this rural area. We have to do it. I saw something in the paper about Harborside. They're talking about the industrialization of marijuana. They want to grow all their stuff in the valley, which everybody knew was going to happen, and then they just want to bring it to their thing. Nobody else involved. Who does that remind you of? I mean, there's lots of big businesses that behave that way, but we can't sustain that kind of industry in Humboldt County. We never could. So what do? We have to do what we can to brand it and do it consciously and do a good job. And so kudos to you for stepping up again.
If I could jump in on the crime side, I'm shocked. I'm sure you're all shocked that I would opine on that. Violence in Humboldt County rivals New Orleans. Let's put it in perspective. When you take a look at a city about the same size as Humboldt County, Santa Rosa, how many homicides did they have last year? Anybody know? Less than 5. I think it was 4. How many did Humboldt County have? 22. You see the problem? And everybody would like to say, hey, it's the other guy, it's the other girl, it's these people. But the reality is, and we talked about community, this brings us back to center here. If the cannabis community truly wants to be part of society, you have to control the violence. EPD, Eureka Police Department, seized 125 guns last year. This is insane for a small city. We're already over 30 guns that we've seized from people, another 48 we purchased from people. So we're on record pace again. And it's going to be incumbent upon those in the cannabis community, especially the larger growers, to say, we will not have anything to do with you if you're part of a violent community. If you're carrying a gun, if you're using meth or heroin on our property, you are done. And in order to become part of civil society, there has to be a rule of law. And without the rule of law, we get this in Humboldt County. And so the reason I accepted this to come and speak today is because there has to come a point where the grower community itself stands up and say, enough is enough. If you're part of this, we're cutting you off completely and shunning them. It's called leverage deterrence. And in order for this to take place, the grower community has to have a singular voice, has to be strong, and has to be willing to step out, not take reprisal into their own hands, but to say, we're not going to be part of it, and we'll cut you off completely. We are currently, and I think, speaking of future, seeing a trend where we are getting people from around the country and around the world who are hyper-violent. Arcata PD arrested 2 guys with AR-15s last week. We just sent a case to the U.S. Attorney's Office where a guy we got with a 1/4 pound of heroin twice with automatic weapons. And so now they're going to pick that case up and hopefully prosecute it. Because now he's looking at a substantial amount of time. And so we'll do our part. But we definitely need the cannabis community to stand firm, stand united, stand together now that it's going to be legal, and say, we are not going to have any part of this. because you have to come into the rule of law by developing your own culture of lawfulness. If you don't, the, quote, normal community, if you will, is going to shun you and is going to say, we want nothing to do with you. You haven't brought anything good for the last 30 years. What good can it possibly be? You have the prime opportunity to turn this corner, to make this change. And I implore you, now is the time. Rather than sneaking around and setting up HBO labs, HBO, that would be a television show. BHO labs, you know.
Can't get HBO out in the rural area, maybe that's why.
And, you know,
It's in the pilot right now.
Yeah. Rather than sneaking around and doing all that kind of stuff, now's the time to go legit. And yes, it's going to cost you a ton of money. Welcome to the real world.
Yeah.
Taxes are hurts all of us. And so anyway, I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I just want to jump on it, and I don't want to take away my colleagues' time, but I do want to say that, you know, I remember covering stories where people were in a community and knew who killed somebody and didn't tell because it was going to endanger them having the cops come up to their place. That's got to stop, and I believe it has already. I mean, just yesterday, that incident in Darville, that was a 911 call. The cops were there, everybody was there, and those guys were caught. So I think people are standing up and saying, you know what, we are part of society, and we deserve to be protected. But as the chief said, you got to play your part as well. And part of it is to resist that incursion of the heroin dealers and the crack dealers and all of those guys, and to stand for a good community. So got a lot of work to do.
Most of the people I see in the audience here today, you know, I feel like a lot of this is getting, you know, preaching to the choir, because these people have already chosen to help or stand up in some way. But the important thing to remember is that you are also the messenger. You have to take this back to your communities and spread this message. Even though you're standing up, maybe your neighbor isn't, or maybe, you know, folks down the road aren't. And that, you know, it's important to be the catalyst there and to bring that message back to your communities, you know, on the smaller level, and say, hey guys, you know, it's time for us to participate, and this is, you know, something we can do. You know, lead by example, be the change you wish to see. All of those fun, you know, colloquialisms we're used to hearing, you know, they're true. They actually do mean something. If you don't, you know, perpetuate that change, we won't see it.
I love that. Thank you. Because you guys are all individuals, virtually individuals that are connected to networks. And then those individual networks are connected to other individual networks. And if we just keep messaging this over and over again, that these are the values that we want to live by and others to live by in our community, it'll start getting out. I think that one other thing I would add is we're in a very special time. Thank you for that, Estelle. You really, I think, defined it very well. But when I go out into the hills and talk with some of these people about the history, it wasn't all violent either. It was also very, I mean, it was like hippies, very much. And there was, they were visionaries, actually, in a lot of ways. And I also want to parse a little bit, you know, this drug thing. Alcohol's a drug, tobacco's a drug. Everyone knows this, I'm not going to belabor it. But cannabis really is, the medical research is coming out. And I believe that for people, I've got gray hair now. And part of this medicine, I'm going to depend on later in life, and I don't have to depend on other pharmaceuticals, which are also drugs, when this becomes legitimate. But I think the violence part of it, Chief, I think that's key, because it does bring, because of that outlaw element, there's a certain amount of hide and seek that has happened for years. And so that transition into joining the rest of us in this conversation that we're having today is really going to be important. So I think it works both ways. I think, you know, the old timber community, let's call it, maybe the ranching community, they need to be welcoming too, we hope. We would love to have a Venn diagram. all this coming together more and more every single year and having these kinds of conversations. But the networks, thank you, Dani, for that. That's really important. When you go here, this is recorded. Tell people, go watch this, or just say, hey, I attended this thing. It made me think about some things differently. Maybe I'm not a leader, but maybe I can find a leader in the community and then just help them. Any questions from the audience? Please.
My concern is who are we identifying with farmers, and I'm not a farmer. We talk about all the nice things about moving into this legal market. When the farmers that are standing up are facing tremendous costs, challenges. It's rocking their world, and they're looking to be part of this California compliance system, fully regulated. Their feet are in. What are we going to do about those who continue in the black market and bring in the undesirable items? It's not the folks you're talking to.
I'm going to rephrase your question for the camera. That was excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. What was brought up was the black market, and we're becoming part of a regulatory system. It's still being created. People have compliance costs, taxes to pay like everyone else to earn that business license on the wall. But I'll just say really quickly and then hand this off to the panel in answer to that question. Thank you again. If you did I'm a business guy too, and if you just did an XY graph and just stacked two bars next to each other, and one bar is cannabis, cultivation, manufacturing, etc. And you stacked all the different segments of compliance costs, taxes, tariffs, etc., all the way up that are currently being cumulatively and collectively, not just here, but eventually nationally. When you add all those up, that bar is really high. And then you look at this bar over here. Estelle, you mentioned wine before. Let's just talk about wine, grape agriculture. Those costs, they pay their taxes, they pay their compliance costs, but those costs are down here. And you're talking about the cost of doing business to be a part of the community and all that. I think that's another issue, an economic issue, a part of our community that's realistic, and it's going to be a challenge. I'll open it up to the panel.
Well, I'm never shy to answer. This is the big challenge we have, is how do we navigate this gigantic change, and how do we steer it to where we envision it to be? And that's always the answer that we get as well. There's always going to be the black market, and if you make it more expensive, then people are not going to come in. But the vision is that as you and you and you and you and everybody else becomes compliant, or becomes a part of goes towards the light, let's say, okay? Those who are not will be more easily dealt with. When everybody's illegal, it's very, very hard to pick out the good players from the bad players. When everybody is permitted, or where the most people are permitted, then the bad players are going to be a lot more easy to find. Plus which, don't you think that if somebody has a vineyard out in Napa that they went through all of the process to get going, and then somebody comes in with a bulldozer and creates their own vineyard without doing anything, don't you think they're going to bring that to the attention to the county if the county doesn't know already? And I think that's where that whole concept of snitch should go away, because now we're talking about people who have a road to legality. If they will take that step, they have a road to legality, and there is no excuse for not doing it. And even if you can't, and I was thinking about this the other day, because I know a bunch of people, small grows, mom and pop, the definition of it. this is a huge thing for them. They can still do a little, but what we're talking about is growing for commercial purposes, growing to sell to others. You can still grow for your own use. You can still grow for medicinal use, but to grow for sale, you have to have a permit. And if you're not doing that, and you're a big grow, you gotta be nabbed, and you gotta be shown the door. And I think that we have to do that. That is the only way that we'll get rid of the underground. We can't say to ourselves, it's inevitable. We have to say, we're going to change it. And sure, I mean, I don't know how many people are making alcohol out in the hills. It's not too many, you know. It happens. It happens over time that it's just not costly. And then remember, you're driving down the road. Now the CHP knows you've got your permit. If they stop you, you're good to go. I mean, there's all sorts of aspects that are going to happen that will clearly define the people who are not willing to step up from the people who are. And there are going to be more defined small licenses available, those kind of things. So again, I know it seems inevitable, and it will be for a while, but this will go away too. And this is part of the vision. The vision is to make it clean, secure, a part of the community, and we protect our children as well as ourselves, which is a very big deal for me. And so hopefully that's how it's going to work. And it will work, again, if we're all part of the team that says, it's expensive, it's hard, but I'm doing it.
Karen, do you want to talk about Arcata in particular, because you're in transition yourself with the innovation zone and other things. How welcoming is the community as you cross that line?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief. I think you said this is sort of the messy in the middle piece, and there are a lot of fees. This is an industry that I don't think we have, from an economic standpoint, understood what the price break is on this industry yet. And so as that economic data comes forward, I think you will start to see some of the regulation change. I am concerned about the fees that came in through Prop 64. I think they're high. I think they're going to not favor the small local farmer. And I think we're going to have to, as a community countywide, be a voice for that in Sacramento. Yet I still don't know, and I probably never will in my position. I only see a little fraction of it, what that price break is going to be. In Arcata, we made a very conscious choice not to tax this industry, to regulate the industry based on what it was going to cost us, because we didn't feel like we knew where that price break was at this point either. So the cost to get into business in Arcata is a permit fee. It is paid annually, but it's not necessarily based on your square footage or your output from your business. And we'll see how that works. We have had nobody flinch at our fees yet and saying that that's going to be the make or break for their industry. The hardest challenge for folks, and we're not in the rural setting, so we're much lower on the cultivation side and much higher on the manufacturing side. And the big hurdle for folks coming into our innovation zone is they've never had to get a building permit before. And that is an industry that has been regulated for centuries, and it is regulated in minutia, and that's daunting. So getting a good engineer that's working on plan sets with you as you go through this process, I think is very helpful. Getting somebody who can help you write a business plan if you're a new farmer. There are a lot of things that folks in this region know about the agriculture industry that can be translated into a business plan for a small rural farmer, I think, to make them much more successful.
Just on the enforcement side, to get back to your question. Yeah. I think the reality is, with the Trump administration's vigor of prosecuting marijuana cases, with the states doing everything they can to block that vigor, and all the rest of us caught in the middle. But here's, I think, what's going to happen. When you legalize marijuana in the state, and so people will come into compliance with that, that does eliminate a certain percentage of those that are out there that are not. I think that once we get going, I think more people will flood, seeing that, well, people aren't getting arrested and the government can be trusted at some level. The second piece, though, is those that are not now compliant. are often the outlaws and the criminals that you spoke of earlier. And I think what you're going to see is we'll do everything within our power to destroy them. And what I mean by that is prosecuting them federally, using the IRS to go after every asset that they have or their family has. Government can be pretty vicious for those that don't come into compliance. It's one thing to grow a little pot and sell to your neighbor, whatever the case may be. You run a business without paying the federal government their taxes, holy hell will break loose. And so I think it may take a little bit of time, but that's what you're going to see. So it would behoove those on the margins to give the county their money before the federal government gets theirs.
Yeah, I just, thank you for saying that, Andy. I can't talk like him. I don't have a gun, you know.
You can borrow it.
Thank you. I know I'm shooting. Okay, but here's the deal, though. He's absolutely right. It's hard to say we're going to be tough, because I understand people have PTSD. They have, you know, they went through all sorts of hell to get to where they are today. But honestly, you ask for it to be legal, it's legal, but this is what legal looks like. And honestly, there are people who are a real drain on our community. The reason we have an excise tax on the county level is because this is a very big part, or is becoming a very big part of Humboldt, and it needs government assistance in many different avenues, whether it's the roads or policing or whatever. So that doesn't come from the fees that you pay for getting a permit. So that's why it's there.
One last comment, please.
Thank you so much for being here today. And this is a question about HSU. And with the passage of Prop 64, there is going to soon be about $10 million per year available as grants for public universities for research. And I'm starting to get the feeling when I attend workshops, etc., with HSU in mind, that HSU is very hesitant to pursue that grant money because they receive federal funds. And it's just kind of a real strong irony that this grant money is available for public universities, yet universities are hesitant to apply. And except there's UC San Diego actually has that marijuana research that's going to be getting $10 million or $20 million for years and years for research, and that's in public. Is there anything that you as leaders can help bridge that gap regarding that hesitancy with HSU?
Just to repeat the question in brief, HSU hasn't really gotten on the bandwagons fast yet to getting some of the monies that are going to come from the tariffs that are using to create revenue from the industry. How can we encourage them to increase, apply for the grants? And the research, which is so important to the next iteration of this industry.
Well, the universities are in the same position that the banks are in. In other words, it's that federal component. Universities get federal funding. They can't be involved with cannabis. So we are at the California State Association of Counties looking at that. It's one of our policy statements to encourage the federal government and state government to explore ways to bridge that gap. And of course, the ideal one would be for the delisting of cannabis on a federal level, but if that's not with the current administration, there are ways that it can be approached, you know, if they're tightly regulated. Clearly, we need that research and development. And I will say this, aside from what money is created by growing cannabis, etc., I don't know how we're going to quantify it, but there has been a boom in employment in Humboldt County. As well as a green rush, there's been a lot of people who've gotten jobs here. This could be very, very good argument as well in terms of all the ancillary things that go with a regulated industry, whether it's the greenhouses or whatever, you know. There's lots of people getting work out of this. So this is a good argument to people who make money based on revenue and expenses.
Excellent question. Thank you. I'm just going to close because we're now up against the hour with, first of all, thank you. This has been a very rich conversation. I think that one of my takeaways that I'd like to offer is going back to Chief Mills, New Orleans. That's interesting.
Pardon?
The New Orleans comparison. I know, Dani, you and Richard at CCBH, you did an analysis of Humboldt with American Canyon. That economy is compared with Humboldt and what it could be. The jobs, I think, yes, the research, and not just cannabis jobs, by the way. I think this builds on itself. So I guess one of the reasons why would a futurist be in Humboldt County? I'm really fascinated by history, but also leverage. There is so much opportunity here to create a new industry that really can cut a standard different than anyone else can because they've been doing it for so many years. It's just stuck. It's just, incremental. We have a chance really to be true leaders and revolutionize what a local economy and a community might look like. And that's the challenge before of all of us. And I'd like to leave you with that. Thank you for attending, and your questions were excellent. Thank you very much.